In the heart of Chicago, a city known for its vibrant culture and deep-rooted history, tensions between law enforcement and minority communities had been simmering for years. The divide grew wider with each passing day, fueled by incidents of misconduct, prejudice, and systemic inequality. Amidst this backdrop of unrest lived Detective Jasmine Carter, a woman whose life was defined by resilience, determination, and an unwavering commitment to justice. Jasmine wasn't just another officer on the force, she was a trailblazer. Born and raised in one of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods, she understood firsthand the struggles faced by marginalized communities. Her journey to becoming a detective hadn't been easy. From navigating personal hardships to overcoming institutional barriers, every step of her career had been a battle against stereotypes and biases. Yet through sheer grit and perseverance, she earned respect not only from her colleagues but also from the people she served. She was known as someone who listened, someone who cared, and most importantly, someone who acted when others turned a blind eye. On this particular morning, however, Jasmine wasn't stepping into her role as a detective. Instead, she found herself sitting nervously in a courthouse hallway, clutching a folder filled with documents that represented years of memories. Her childhood home. The small house where she grew up held countless stories. Laughter shared with siblings, late-night talks with her mother, and dreams whispered under flickering streetlights outside her bedroom window. But now, it was at risk of being taken away due to a legal dispute over ownership. Jasmine had spent weeks preparing for this day, gathering evidence, consulting lawyers, and trying to stay optimistic despite the looming uncertainty. Dressed in a simple blouse and slacks, she blended seamlessly with the other civilians waiting for their cases to be called. There was no badge clipped to her belt, no uniform signaling her authority. Today she was simply a woman fighting to hold on to something precious. As she sat there lost in thought, Officer Greg Peterson walked past. A tall, burly man with graying hair and a stern expression, Greg had been assigned to courthouse security duty, a routine assignment he approached with little enthusiasm. Over the years, Greg had developed a reputation within the department. Some praised his dedication to maintaining order, while others whispered about his abrasive demeanor and, prejudiced views. His interactions with minority groups were often fraught with tension, marked by assumptions rather than understanding. To many, Greg embodied everything wrong with the system: arrogance masked as authority, bias disguised as protocol. Greg's eyes scanned the crowded hallway, landing briefly on Jasmine. He didn't recognize her as a fellow officer. In fact, he barely registered her as more than a face in the crowd. What caught his attention was her posture, confident, almost defiant. In his mind, such behavior could only mean trouble. Without knowing anything about her circumstances, Greg made a snap judgment. Just another angry black woman causing a scene, he muttered under his breath, unaware of how wrong he was. Unbeknownst to Greg, Jasmine was anything but ordinary. Beneath her calm exterior lay years of experience handling high-pressure situations, negotiating with suspects, and standing firm in the face of adversity. But today, she was focused solely on the task ahead, presenting her case before the judge. As her name was finally called, she rose steadily, smoothing out her clothes and taking a deep breath. Walking into the courtroom, she exuded quiet strength, her voice steady as she addressed the bench. Each word she spoke carried weight, reflecting not just her argument but also her character. Meanwhile, Greg remained outside, growing increasingly agitated. Something about Jasmine unsettled him, though he couldn't quite pinpoint why. Perhaps it was her composure, or maybe it was the way she carried herself with an air of authority he didn't expect. Whatever the reason, his discomfort soon turned into suspicion. When Jasmine emerged from the courtroom after her hearing, still composed but visibly frustrated, Greg seized the opportunity to assert his dominance. Approaching her with exaggerated confidence, Greg demanded to know what business she had disrupting the proceedings. His tone was sharp, accusatory, leaving no room for explanation. Taken aback by his hostility, Jasmine attempted to clarify the situation, explaining that she was merely advocating for her rights. But Greg wasn't interested in listening. To him, She was just another problem to solve, another obstacle to remove. What started as a verbal confrontation quickly escalated. Frustrated by his refusal to hear her out, Jasmine tried to walk away, hoping to avoid further conflict, but Greg wasn't done. Grabbing her arm roughly, he pulled her back, his grip tightening as he reiterated his demands. It was then, in a moment of unchecked aggression, that Greg crossed a line he couldn't uncross. With a swift motion, he slapped her across the face, a shocking act witnessed by several bystanders. The sound echoed through the hallway, drawing gasps from those nearby. For a brief second, time seemed to freeze. Then, without hesitation, Jasmine reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet. Flipping it open, she revealed her badge, the unmistakable emblem of the Chicago Police Department. Meeting Greg's wide-eyed gaze, she delivered the words that would change both their lives forever. "You just assaulted a fellow officer." Though the incident itself lasted mere moments, its impact reverberated far beyond the courthouse walls. For Jasmine, it was a stark reminder of the challenges she faced daily, not just as a woman of color, but as someone striving to make a difference in a flawed system. For Greg, it was a wake-up call, albeit one that came too late. And for everyone else watching, it was a chilling illustration of the work still needed to bridge divides and foster mutual respect. As the story unfolded, it became clear that this encounter was more than just a clash between two individuals. It was a reflection of larger societal issues demanding attention. The stage was set for a dramatic reckoning, one that would test the limits of accountability, redemption, and humanity itself. The tension in the courthouse hallway reached a boiling point as Officer Greg Peterson's actions spiraled out of control. What had started as a routine security detail quickly turned into a confrontation that neither Jasmine nor Greg could have anticipated. Despite her calm demeanor and attempts to explain herself, Greg's assumptions about Jasmine only grew stronger. To him, she was just another civilian causing trouble, someone who needed to be put in their place. His mind refused to entertain the possibility that she might be more than what met the eye. When Jasmine tried to leave after realizing the futility of reasoning with Greg, he blocked her path. "You're not going anywhere until you answer my questions," he barked, his voice echoing through the crowded corridor. People nearby began to take notice, some whispering among themselves while others watched silently, unsure of what to do. Jasmine clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. She knew better than to escalate the situation further. But Greg's aggressive stance left her with few options. "Officer," Jasmine said firmly, maintaining eye contact despite the rising fear in her chest. "I'm not here to cause any problems. I've already explained my situation. If you'll let me go, I can handle this peacefully." Her tone was measured, professional, qualities honed over years of working in law enforcement. But instead of diffusing the tension, her words seemed to infuriate Greg even more. To him, her composure felt like defiance, a challenge to his authority. Greg stepped closer, invading Jasmine's personal space. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he snapped, pointing a finger inches from her face. The gesture was both intimidating and humiliating, drawing audible gasps from onlookers. Jasmine took a step back, her heart pounding. She didn't want to make a scene, but she also couldn't allow herself to be treated this way without standing up for herself. "I'm not trying to interfere with your duties," she replied, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "But you need to understand that I'm not the person you think I am. Let me walk away and we can avoid making this worse." Her plea fell on deaf ears. Greg's grip tightened around her arm as he pulled her toward him. "You don't get to decide what happens here," he growled, his face reddening with anger. The physical restraint sent a wave of panic through Jasmine, but it also ignited a spark of determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting against the very stereotypes and biases that had plagued her throughout her career. And then it happened, the moment that would change everything. In a fit of rage, Greg raised his hand and struck Jasmine across the face. The sound of the slap reverberated through the hallway, silencing the murmurs of bystanders. For a split second, everyone froze, stunned by the sheer audacity of the act. Even Greg seemed momentarily shocked by what he had done. his eyes widening as reality began to sink in. Jasmine staggered slightly, her cheek stinging from the impact. Pain shot through her. But it wasn't the kind of pain that immobilized her. It was the kind that fueled her resolve. Slowly, she straightened herself, meeting Greg's gaze with an intensity that made him flinch. Without saying a word, she reached into her bag and retrieved her wallet. Flipping it open with deliberate precision, she held it up for Greg and everyone else to see. The badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its insignia unmistakable. "You just assaulted a fellow officer," Jasmine said, her voice cutting, through the silence like a knife. Each word carried weight, dripping with a mixture of disbelief and authority. The contrast between her composed delivery and Greg's panicked expression was striking. For the first time in years, Greg found himself at a loss for words. The crowd erupted into murmurs, some expressing outrage while others looked on in disbelief. A few people pulled out their phones, capturing the aftermath of the incident on camera. Word spread quickly, reaching court staff, lawyers, and even journalists stationed nearby. Within minutes, the hallway became a flurry of activity as security personnel rushed to contain the situation. Someone called for a supervisor, while another alerted internal affairs. It was clear that this wasn't going to end quietly. For Greg, the realization of what he had done hit him like a freight train. His initial bravado crumbled, replaced by a mixture of dread and shame. He stared at Jasmine's badge, unable to comprehend how he had misjudged her so completely. All the assumptions he had made about her based on appearances now seemed absurd, almost laughable, if the circumstances weren't so serious. As the gravity of his actions sank in, Greg's confidence wavered, leaving him vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced before. Jasmine, on the other hand, remained remarkably composed. Though her cheek throbbed and her emotions churned, she refused to let the incident reduce her to anger or despair. Instead, she used the moment to assert her dignity and demand accountability. Turning to the gathering crowd, she addressed them directly. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's about every person who has ever been judged unfairly because of the color of their skin or the uniform they wear, or don't wear. We deserve better than this." Her words resonated deeply with those around her. Some nodded in agreement while others applauded softly, moved by her courage. Even those who didn't fully understand the complexities of the situation recognized the significance of what had transpired. This wasn't merely a case of misconduct. It was a stark reminder of the systemic issues plaguing society, a microcosm of larger struggles playing out across the nation. As the commotion continued, Greg retreated slightly, his earlier aggression giving way to uncertainty. He glanced around nervously, aware that all eyes were now on him. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, suffocating and inescapable. For the first time in his career, he felt truly exposed, stripped of the shield of authority he had long relied upon. And yet there was no escaping the consequences of what he had done. By the time internal affairs officers arrived on the scene, the story had already begun to take shape. Witnesses recounted the events leading up to the slap, painting a damning picture of Greg's behavior. Meanwhile, Jasmine cooperated fully with investigators, providing a detailed account of the incident while emphasizing her desire for justice, not revenge. She understood that true change required more than punishing one individual. It demanded a collective effort to address the root causes of such conflicts. As the day wore on, news of the altercation spread beyond the courthouse walls. Social media, lit up with posts and videos, sparking heated debates about race, power, and accountability. Journalists scrambled to piece together the story, eager to uncover the truth behind the viral moment. By evening, justice for Jasmine had become a trending topic, uniting voices from all corners of the city and beyond. For Jasmine, the incident served as both a personal affront and a public platform. While she never sought to be in the spotlight, she recognized the opportunity it presented to advocate for meaningful reform. For Greg, however, the fallout was far more devastating. The slap that had seemed like a fleeting act of dominance had unraveled his carefully constructed facade, exposing the prejudices and insecurities lurking beneath. Whether he liked it or not, his actions had set off a chain reaction, one that would force him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and the world he operated in. The days following the courthouse incident were nothing short of chaotic. News outlets across Chicago, and eventually the entire country, picked up the story, transforming it into a national conversation about race, power, and accountability within law enforcement. The image of Detective Jasmine Carter holding up her badge after being slapped by Officer Greg Peterson became a symbol of resilience and defiance against systemic injustice. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like Justice for Jasmine and Accountability Now, amplifying calls for reform and transparency. For Jasmine, life suddenly felt like a whirlwind. Reporters camped outside her home, eager to capture her side of the story. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers reached out to express their support, flooding her phone with messages of encouragement. While she appreciated the outpouring of solidarity, Jasmine couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. She hadn't asked for this level of attention. She simply wanted justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been mistreated because of their race or background. As the investigation unfolded, Internal Affairs launched a thorough probe into the incident. Every detail was scrutinized. Greg's behavior leading up to the altercation, his history of interactions with minority groups, and the circumstances surrounding the slap itself. Witnesses from the courthouse hallway provided statements, many of them corroborating Jasmine's account. They described Greg as aggressive and dismissive, painting a picture of an officer who let prejudice cloud his judgment. Meanwhile, security footage captured parts of the confrontation, offering undeniable proof of Greg's misconduct. Within the Chicago Police Department, opinions were divided. Some officers rallied behind Greg, arguing that he was just doing his job and suggesting that Jasmine should have identified herself earlier to avoid confusion. Others, however, openly supported Jasmine, praising her composure and condemning Greg's actions as unacceptable. These conflicting viewpoints highlighted the deep fissures within the department, exposing long-standing tensions between those committed to reform and those resistant to change. For Greg, the aftermath was devastating. Once confident in his authority, he now found himself grappling with shame and fear. His reputation, once a source of pride, lay in tatters. Colleagues avoided him, unsure of how to react to the scandal. Even his superiors distanced themselves, knowing that associating with him could tarnish their own standing. Isolated and humiliated, Greg began to question everything: his career choices, his beliefs, and the biases he had carried for so long. Amidst the chaos, Jasmine faced a difficult decision. Should she press formal charges against Greg, potentially fracturing the department further? Or should she allow the internal disciplinary process to run its course, risking leniency toward Greg? After much deliberation, she chose the former, believing that accountability was essential for meaningful change. "This isn't about revenge," she told her lawyer during one of their meetings. "It's about sending a message that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it." Her decision sent shockwaves through the department. Pressing charges meant taking the matter out of Internal Affairs' hands and placing it squarely in the public domain. It also meant subjecting herself to intense scrutiny, as defense attorneys would undoubtedly try to discredit her character and motives. But Jasmine was undeterred. She knew the risks, yet she also understood the importance of standing firm. If she backed down now, it would send the wrong message, one of complacency and acceptance of injustice. Greg, meanwhile, struggled to come to terms with the consequences of his actions. Facing criminal charges for assault and misconduct, he hired a high-profile attorney to represent him. Despite his legal team's efforts to paint the incident as a misunderstanding, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Security footage showed him grabbing Jasmine roughly and slapping her without provocation. Witness testimonies painted him as hostile and unprofessional. Even attempts to argue that he didn't recognize her as a fellow officer fell flat when investigators pointed out that his behavior was inappropriate regardless of her identity. As the case gained momentum, public opinion shifted decisively in Jasmine's favor. Civil rights organizations rallied around her, using her story to highlight broader issues of racial profiling and police brutality. Community leaders organized protests and town hall meetings, demanding greater oversight and accountability within law enforcement. For many, Jasmine's bravery inspired hope, a reminder that individuals could challenge systemic injustices and spark meaningful conversations. But the spotlight wasn't easy for Jasmine to bear. Navigating the complexities of fame while dealing with the emotional toll of the incident tested her resilience. Sleepless nights became common as she replayed the events in her mind, questioning whether she could have handled things differently. Yet through it all, she remained steadfast in her commitment to justice. She used interviews and public appearances to advocate for reform, emphasizing the need for empathy, understanding, and mutual respect between law enforcement and the communities they served. Behind closed doors, Greg wrestled with guilt and regret. Confronted with irrefutable evidence of his misconduct, he began to reflect on the prejudices that had shaped his worldview. He thought about the countless interactions he'd had with people of color over the years, interactions tainted by assumptions and stereotypes. Though painful, these reflections marked the beginning of a slow journey toward self-awareness. For the first time, he acknowledged that his actions weren't just harmful to others, they were destructive to himself as well. The trial loomed large on the horizon, promising to be a pivotal moment not only for Jasmine and Greg, but for the city of Chicago as a whole. Legal experts predicted it would set a precedent for how similar cases were handled in the future. Activists saw it as an opportunity to push for sweeping reforms, while skeptics warned that institutional resistance might prevent real change. Regardless of the outcome, one thing was certain. The incident had ignited a firestorm of discussion, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and accountability. In quieter moments, Jasmine allowed herself to imagine what victory might look like, not just for her personally, but for society at large. She envisioned a future where officers like Greg were held accountable for their actions, where implicit biases were addressed through training and dialogue, and where marginalized voices were heard and respected. It was a lofty dream, but one worth fighting for. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Jasmine knew she had already made an impact simply by refusing to stay silent. For Greg, the weeks leading up to the trial were filled with anxiety and introspection. He knew there was no undoing what he had done, no erasing the pain he had caused. But perhaps, he thought, there was still a chance to make amends, to prove that he was capable of growth and redemption. Whether society would forgive him remained to be seen. But for now, he focused on taking responsibility for his actions and learning from them. As the city braced for the trial, the ripple effects of the incident continued to spread. Conversations about race and policing dominated dinner tables, classrooms, and workplaces. People who had never paid attention to such issues before found themselves questioning their own biases and privileges. In this way, Jasmine's courage had sparked something far greater than she could have imagined, a movement toward understanding, accountability, and hopefully, healing. The trial of Officer Greg Peterson versus Detective Jasmine Carter became one of the most talked about cases in Chicago's recent history. Courtrooms typically reserved for mundane legal proceedings were now filled to capacity, with reporters, activists, and concerned citizens packing every available seat. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of anticipation, tension, and hope. For many, this wasn't just a courtroom drama. It was a referendum on justice itself. As the trial began, both sides presented their arguments passionately. Jasmine's lawyer painted a vivid picture of systemic racism and unchecked privilege within law enforcement, framing Greg's actions as symptomatic of deeper societal issues. They highlighted his history of discriminatory behavior, presenting testimony after testimony from individuals who had been subjected to similar mistreatment at his hands. One witness recounted being unfairly detained during a routine traffic stop, simply because of the color of their skin. Another described how Greg had dismissed their concerns about neighborhood safety, labeling them as complainers without investigating further. These accounts wove together a damning narrative, leaving little doubt about Greg's culpability. On the other hand, Greg's defense team worked tirelessly to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They argued that the incident was an isolated moment of poor judgment rather than evidence of malice or prejudice. They emphasized Greg's decades of service, attempting to portray him as a dedicated officer who had made a single mistake under pressure. His attorney even suggested that Jasmine's failure to immediately identify herself as a fellow officer contributed to the misunderstanding, though this argument drew sharp rebukes from the judge, who reminded the court that no amount of provocation justified physical violence. Throughout the proceedings, Jasmine remained composed, her presence commanding respect. When called to testify, she spoke with clarity and conviction, recounting the events of that fateful day in detail. Her voice never wavered as she described the humiliation of being assaulted by someone sworn to protect and serve. She didn't shy away from sharing her emotions either, acknowledging the fear and anger she felt in the moment. But what truly resonated with the jury and the public watching via live stream was her focus on the bigger picture. "This isn't just about me," she said, leaning slightly forward in the witness box. "It's about every person who has ever been treated as less than human because of the assumptions people make about them. It's about holding ourselves accountable, not just as individuals but as a society. We can't move forward unless we confront these truths head-on." Her words struck a chord, not only with those present in the courtroom but also with viewers across the nation. Social media erupted with praise for her courage and eloquence, with many calling her a beacon of hope in a time of division. Even some of Greg's supporters found themselves moved by her testimony, forced to reconsider their initial stance. For Greg, testifying proved to be a harrowing experience. Under cross-examination, he admitted to slapping Jasmine, though he initially struggled to articulate why he had done so. When pressed by the prosecutor, he confessed that his actions stemmed from frustration and fear of losing control, fear of being wrong, and ultimately, fear of people unlike himself. His admission was raw and unfiltered, revealing vulnerabilities he had long buried beneath layers of bravado. "I let my biases get the better way of me," he said, his voice trembling. "I judged Detective Carter based on her appearance instead of giving her the respect she deserved. I know now that what I did was wrong and I regret it deeply." While his apology seemed sincere, it came too late to undo the damage caused. The jury listened intently, weighing his remorse against the weight of the evidence presented. By the end of the trial, it was clear that Greg's actions couldn't be excused as a mere lapse in judgment. They represented a pattern of behavior rooted in prejudice and entitlement. When the verdict was finally delivered, the courtroom fell silent. After hours of deliberation, the jury found Greg guilty of assault and misconduct. The judge sentenced him to probation, community service, and mandatory sensitivity training, along with termination from the police force. While some felt the punishment was too lenient, others saw it as a step toward accountability, a signal that even those in positions of power could be held responsible for their actions. In the wake of the trial, Jasmine emerged as a symbol of resilience and advocacy. She used her newfound platform to push for meaningful reforms within law enforcement, advocating for policies that prioritize transparency, empathy, She inspired countless young officers, particularly women and minorities, to pursue careers in law enforcement despite the challenges they might face. Greg, meanwhile, retreated from public life, grappling with guilt and regret. Losing his badge and reputation left him adrift, unsure of how to rebuild his life. At first, he withdrew completely, isolating himself from friends and family as he processed the fallout of his actions. But over time, he began to seek redemption, not through grand gestures but through small, consistent acts of kindness. He started volunteering at local youth centers, mentoring teenagers from underserved communities. Though hesitant at first, he gradually opened up about his past mistakes, using his story as a cautionary tale. He spoke candidly about the dangers of unchecked bias and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. While forgiveness didn't come easily, his efforts signaled a willingness to change, a small step toward healing old wounds. The ripple effects of the case extended far beyond the individuals involved. Across Chicago, discussions about race, policing, and accountability gained renewed urgency. Community leaders organized workshops and forums aimed at fostering dialogue between law enforcement and residents. The City Council introduced measures to increase oversight of police conduct, including body cameras and independent review boards. Activists hailed these developments as victories, though they acknowledged there was still much work to be done. For Jasmine, the journey was far from over. Though vindicated in court, she knew the fight for justice required sustained effort. She continued to speak out, using her voice to amplify marginalized perspectives and challenge systemic inequities. Her story served as a reminder that progress was possible, but only if people remained committed to confronting uncomfortable truths and pushing for change. As the dust settled, the incident stood as a testament to the power of courage and accountability. It showed that even in moments of conflict and despair, there was room for growth, understanding, and transformation. And while the scars of that day would linger for years to come, they also carried the promise of a brighter, more equitable future, one shaped by the determination of those willing to stand up and demand better. Months after the trial concluded, life in Chicago began to settle into a new rhythm, but the echoes of the courthouse incident continued to reverberate. Detective Jasmine Carter and Officer Greg Peterson had become household names, their stories intertwined in ways neither could have anticipated. For Jasmine, the aftermath of the case brought both challenges and opportunities. She was no longer just a detective. She was a symbol of resilience, courage, and the fight for justice. Her story inspired countless people across the city and beyond to believe that change was possible, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Jasmine threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. No longer content to simply solve crimes, she sought to address the root causes of inequality within the system. She spearheaded initiatives aimed at bridging gaps between law enforcement and marginalized communities, organizing workshops where officers could engage openly with residents. These sessions weren't always easy. Conversations about race, bias, and accountability often sparked heated debates. But they were necessary. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild, one conversation at a time. One of Jasmine's most impactful projects was the creation of a mentorship program for young Black officers navigating the challenges of systemic racism. Drawing from her own experiences, she offered guidance, encouragement, and practical advice to those who felt isolated or overwhelmed. "You're not alone," she would tell them during group meetings. "There will be days when you feel like giving up, when it seems like the world is against you. But remember this: your voice matters. Your presence matters. And together we can make a difference." Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Community leaders praised her dedication, while colleagues marveled at her ability to inspire others. Even some skeptics within the department came around, recognizing the value of her initiatives. Over time, Jasmine's influence extended beyond Chicago, earning her invitations to speak at conferences and panels nationwide. Yet despite her growing fame, she remained grounded, always prioritizing the needs of her community over personal accolades. For Greg Peterson, the road to redemption was far more arduous. Stripped of his badge and reputation, he struggled to find meaning in a life that had once revolved entirely around authority and control. At first, he retreated into solitude, consumed by guilt and shame. Friends stopped calling. Family members kept their distance, and the weight of his actions pressed down on him like an unrelenting storm. It was during these dark days that Greg confronted the ugliest parts of himself, the prejudices he had ignored, the assumptions he had clung to, the harm he had caused without realizing it. But eventually, something shifted. Perhaps it was the realization that wallowing in self-pity wouldn't undo the past, or maybe it was the quiet hope that he could still do some good in the world. Whatever the catalyst, Greg began taking tentative steps toward change. He started volunteering at a local youth center, initially hesitant to reveal his identity. The kids there were skeptical at first, wary of an older white man showing up out of nowhere. But as weeks turned into months, Greg earned their trust, not through grand gestures but through consistency and humility. He spent hours listening to their stories, learning about their struggles and dreams. In turn, he shared pieces of his own journey, carefully acknowledging the mistakes he had made. "I used to think I had all the answers," he admitted during one particularly candid session. "But I was wrong, a lot of times dangerously wrong. What happened with Detective Carter opened my eyes to how much I still need to learn. So if there's one thing I can offer you, it's this. Never stop questioning your assumptions. Never stop trying to understand people different from you." His words resonated with many of the teens, some of whom had grown up distrusting law enforcement. While forgiveness didn't come easily, they appreciated Greg's honesty and willingness to confront his flaws. Over time, he became a fixture, at the center, helping organize activities, tutoring students, and even coaching basketball. Though his efforts couldn't erase the pain he had caused, they signaled a genuine desire to contribute positively to society. Back in the wider world, the legacy of Jasmine and Greg's encounter continued to shape conversations about race, power, and accountability. Activists cited the case as a turning point, a moment when public outrage translated into tangible action. New policies were implemented within the Chicago Police Department, including stricter oversight mechanisms and mandatory training on implicit bias. Community policing programs gained traction, fostering collaboration between officers and residents. While progress was slow and imperfect, it was undeniable. Jasmine played a key role in these developments, using her platform to advocate for systemic reforms. She appeared on talk shows, wrote op-eds, and partnered with organizations dedicated to criminal justice reform. Yet amidst the whirlwind of activity, she never lost sight of what truly mattered: the people she served. Whether mentoring young officers, attending neighborhood meetings, or simply lending a listening ear, Jasmine remained deeply connected to her community. As for Greg, his transformation wasn't universally accepted. Some viewed his volunteer work as a hollow attempt to salvage his reputation, while others dismissed it altogether, arguing that certain actions couldn't be forgiven. But Greg understood that redemption wasn't about seeking approval. It was about making amends in whatever way he could. He knew he couldn't undo the harm he had caused, but he hoped his efforts might prevent similar incidents in the future. The bond between Jasmine and Greg remained complicated. They hadn't spoken since the trial, and neither expected that to change anytime soon. Still, their lives intersected in unexpected ways. During one of her speeches, Jasmine briefly acknowledged Greg's volunteer work, describing it as a step in the right direction. Though brief, her comment carried weight, signaling a willingness to recognize growth, even from someone who had once wronged her. Years later, as Chicago continued to grapple with its complex history, the story of Jasmine and Greg served as a powerful reminder of the possibilities inherent in accountability and empathy. It underscored the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths, not just within institutions but within ourselves, as a means of fostering healing and progress. Their journeys, though vastly different, highlighted the resilience of the human spirit and the capacity for change, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. In the end, the courthouse incident wasn't just about two individuals. It was about a city and a nation striving to become better. Through Jasmine's courage and Greg's eventual reckoning, the narrative shifted from division to dialogue, from conflict to collaboration. And while scars from that day lingered, they also carried the promise of a brighter, more equitable future, one shaped by the determination of those willing to stand up, speak out, and demand better.